this is the real thing. This is what you've been trained for. You are America's best. Make us proud. Ice.
Yes, sir.
Hollywood.
Yes, sir.
Sector 2. Maverick, you back him up with Merlin on Ready 5.
Yes, sir.
Rise!
Well, now take down your fishing pole and meet me at the fishing hole. I can't think of a better way to pass the time of day.
RodMob, your Northern California fishing podcast.
Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. I'm Scott, here in the surprisingly sunny and nice Hayward Hills on another Spare the Air day.
And I'm Sarah, coming at you from my recording paradise here in Santa Cruz.
It's Sunday, December 15th, and you're tuned into the RodMob. This is episode 72 of your weekly Northern California fishing podcast.
Well, we've got the word on the best bites this week. Lots of trout plants happening, contributing to some improved winter action.
Rock fishing is still going strong as the season wraps up.
We have some good Delta reports we'll share with you.
We'll also hit on the results from this week's poll question about California fishing regulations.
And Nick, the informative fisherman, is here. He'll talk common fishing mistakes and answer listeners' questions in another great Q&A.
All that's coming up, but first, let's check in on the news. Sarah, what do you got?
Here's Sarah with the latest headlines.
How about that? Amazing. The minute I saw the giant moose, I remembered hadn't cooked anything for the kids' dinner.
Well, a new hunting and fishing show is coming to the Sportsman channel on TV, and it's going to be hosted by none other than Sarah Palin. The network has ordered 12 episodes of the new show Amazing America, which debuts in April. Huntington Beach resident Joseph Ali went for a dive off the pier on Tuesday night, hoping to grab a lobster, and grab one he did. Instead of the average 2 to 3 pounder, Joseph ended up with a whopping 18-pound lobster. The Orange County Register reports after Joseph Ali noticed the beast hiding in an old pier structure, he stuck half his body in the hole and grabbed the lobster from behind. Quickly, a battle of who was holding on to whom ensued. Ali said the lobster kicked backwards, latching onto his mask and face. There was no way my hand could wrap around his back to grab him, but luckily he latched onto me. Now, Ali will be enjoying a nice lobster dinner with family and friends.
I buy an $8 lobster, fatten it into an $80 lobster, and eat the profit.
Lobsters need salt water.
I'm way ahead of you. Perfect.
Another news-making catch out of Southern California this week, angler Jeff Fangman was fishing off the coast of Camp Pendleton recently when he reeled in a 9.5-foot great white shark. CBS 8 reports using a piece of stingray as bait, Fangman had been fishing in that same spot along the shore for more than 2 hours with little luck until suddenly he felt a pull on his fishing rod. All of a sudden it bowed over and the line was just rolling off the reel, Fangman exclaimed, and then I realized I had something. After reeling in the juvenile shark, Fangman took a couple of photographs, measured her, and then released her safely back into the ocean. The Press-Democrat reports North Coast commercial crab fishermen are back on the water Saturday after a price dispute has kept boats tied up for the past 2 weeks. Wholesalers have been offering $2.50 a pound, and fishermen have been holding out for $3. But the season opens Monday in Oregon with the price set there at $2.65 a pound, and that undercuts the price that North Coast skippers have been holding out for. Now, North Coast crab fishermen are locked in to this lower price. Meanwhile, in Bodega Bay, skippers are watching to see how prices settle out. Chris Lawson, president of the Bodega Bay Fishermen's Marketing Association, tells the Press-Democrat, "It doesn't sound like there's a lot of crabs in the north, and if that's the case, the price should bounce back up because we're approaching the holidays, and that's a big market for them." Well, that's it for the headlines. Now for some tight lines. Here are the latest reports on the best Northern California fishing.
Starting with saltwater, ocean fishing from Monterey to Fort Ross continues to be off the hook. Lings and things are filling sacks, and we're hearing a ton of great reports. Facebook has been plastered with a lot of great photos and happy anglers with big rockfish, lings, and limits of crab. Dungy hunters have had to drop a few extra pots of late, but it's still game on. For those of you south of the Mendocino area, rockfish season ends up on the 31st, so now's the time to get out there, guys.
In the San Francisco Bay, the main action is sharks. Captain Craig Hansen of Argo Sport Fishing has been hooking and releasing leopard sharks in the South Bay.
In the North Bay, anglers are getting some striper and a few sturgeon here and there, but nothing exciting enough to get your panties all in a bunch.
Moving to the Delta, the striper bite is decent on bait throughout the Delta. Liberty Island and the Deepwater Channel have been some good spots. Better sturgeon reports are coming from tide changes in the West Delta. Largemouth, smallies, and many schoolies are keeping anglers busy on the San Joaquin side. It's cold out there, but the brave are getting their fish.
Speaking of the brave, RodMobbers John and Jonathan Politis have been out a couple times this week. Early in the week, Jonathan reported in saying, went out and just threw lures for some stripers and ended up catching and releasing up to 14 bass on the River to Sea S-Waver and Rig Walker. All fish hit on the strong flow of the incoming tide, and one of the fish paid for the trip by having a $50 tag on him.
Then on Thursday, the Politises headed out again to get on the hot bite. John reported fishing with River to Sea Rig Walker swim baits proved to put the hurt on the striped bass that day, with well over a dozen fish landed. These guys sure know Delta fishing. Thanks, John and Jonathan, for continuing to post such helpful reports and awesome pics. And of course, stay tuned later in the show when we talk with the informative fishermen. A couple of the questions in our Q&A are specifically about the Delta. That's coming up after these reports.
Keep us posted. Share your catch, tips, gear reviews, and more on our Facebook page. Facebook.com/RodMob.
Let's take a look at the lakes. Fishing pressure's been light lately on most lakes. Cold weather, hanging holiday lights, and some good football is keeping folks off the water.
250 strands of light, 100 individual bulbs per strand for a grand total of 25,000 imported Italian twinkle lights.
Fire it up, Dad!
Talk about pissing your money away.
In the East Bay, trout plants continue, and the action is heating up at Lake Chabot, Quarry Lakes, Contra Loma, Los Vaqueros, and shore anglers are scoring at Del Valle. Shadow Cliffs has had 4 plants recently.
And in the South Bay, Sandy Will Lake in the Milpitas Hills and Cunningham Lake in San Jose have both got recent trout plants too.
In the Motherlode, Coldwater has fish near the shore, and overall, folks are finding a good bite at Motherlode Lakes. Newly planted trout found homes at Don Pedro and New Melones this week. Lake Amador continues to plant daily, and they're having a great winter. And Lake Comanche is producing too. Plants went down at McClure and McSwain reservoirs, but the bite is only fair.
Other lakes that are producing big chills and some good bites are Almanor, Collins, Berryessa, Inglebright, and Clear Lake.
And out at Pyramid Lake, Saturday, an 18-pound cutthroat was weighed in at Crosby Lodge. The beast was caught from the shore.
Today's episode is not brought to you by a discount mattress store.
On the rivers, guide Scott Caldwell has been working the Klamath and landing some nice winter steelies.
Drift boats on the Trinity River above the North Fork are into the steelhead, too.
On the Upper Sac, Rip Their Lips Guide Service reported good fishing for rainbow and steelhead. Late season salmon limits are being taken around Hamilton City as the season wraps up today.
RodMobber Charles Knott has been hitting the Yuba for some quick trips and posted a picture of a nice Yuba steelhead on our Facebook page this week.
In the Sierras, fly fishing guide Matt Herron is still finding some nice, beautiful Truckee area trout.
And over in the eastern Sierras, weather conditions have been better in the Owens Valley, where Tom of Sierra Drifters Guide Service put clients on a couple dozen fish this weekend. They were drifting the Owens River using low bugs and spruceaboos with a light sinking tip.
Woo! Fish! Woo! All right!
Catch of the week.
This week, our podcast artwork comes courtesy of Charles Knott. Charles sent in a great photo and a great steelhead report from the Yuba River this week and said, 3rd year, same hole, 18 nice keepers, and about 20 natives released this season alone. I used to fish the same hole growing up here. Gotta love those favorite home fishing holes. Thanks for posting, Charles, and congratulations for having this week's Catch of the Week. And now for our poll question.
We've been hitting on the topics of fishing regulations lately, and last week we asked, how do you feel about the rules for fishing in California? Well, we got a lot of responses on this one. About 28% of you said you think the regulations are too tight. Main things people called out here were they think filleting salmon and steelhead should be allowed when you're away from home for vacation, and a couple people mentioned they thought coastal regulations are too conservative. 20% of people responding to the poll said they thought the regulations are just right. One RodMobber explained, "Without the regulations and laws the way they are, we wouldn't have such a badass fishery. There are regulations that help out the conservation of fishing in the future, not just the present." Well, the majority of people, 52% who responded to the poll, think the rules for fishing in California should be tighter. We especially got a lot of comments about striper limits. Several people said they'd like to see a slot limit on stripers. They expressed the opinion that 18 to 32 or 35 inches is good eating, but folks should take pictures and release the hogs. We also heard a lot of comments from folks who think fishing licenses are too expensive, and a bunch of people commented that they don't see the regulations as being problematic, but that there's a lack of enforcement. One RodMobber said, "There is definitely not enough focus on poaching. It's rampant along the Sacramento River. The new restrictions each year only hurt fishermen that fish legally." While speaking of regulations, on January 11th at the International Sportsman's Expo, you can let the DFW director and his team know exactly how you feel about these issues, enforcement, and outdoor opportunities in a brand new panel hosted by Sepp Hendrickson, host of California Sportsman Radio. Sepp developed the panel with the intent of increasing communication and informing the public about the vast decision-making process involved in California's bureaucracy. This unique opportunity provides Northern California sportsmen with the ability to relate and receive clarification and solid info from top CDFW management about directions, goals, regulations, studies, licenses, tags, stamps, and enforcement. Sepp says it'll be an informative panel and might get a little rowdy, but that's the idea. You can bet that California sportsmen will be heard, and CDFW will be there to listen and clarify.
And now for this week's poll question. We look forward to the ISE in Sacramento every year, and for those of you who are planning to attend, we want to know, what's your favorite part of the show? Is it the seminars, seeing all the new gear at the exhibits, getting those good deals? Maybe it's the food. Maybe you love those giant churros. Or maybe you just like soaking it all in.
Let us know. Head on over to rodmob.com and cast your vote. All right, now it's time for the Informative Fisherman. This week, Nick talks about common fishing mistakes and answers RodMobber's questions.
Another great video hit YouTube from the Informative Fisherman covering the common fishing mistakes. This is part 2 he's got up. I've always learning stuff from this, and we're going to ask Nick some questions that we got from you guys on the RodMob Facebook page. Or actually, you guys emailed those into us, and we're going to cover some of the topics in the video. Well, thanks for joining us, Nick.
Yeah, no problem.
Well, cool, man. Another great video you made of common fishing mistakes there, and you're working the rod in the pool. That was pretty neat. Helpful to have some water nearby.
Oh, yeah. I know a lot of people don't have that option, but it's just a fun thing if you can get over and teach someone new how to properly keep the rod loaded the whole time.
One of the first things you covered was kind of guys not bringing the right clothes or not bringing enough warm clothes.
It's funny because it seems so blatantly obvious, but if you do not really sit down and think about what you need clothes-wise for the trip that's ahead of you, if you just think you're going to grab something in the morning, you will always forget something, and psychologically it's going to mess you up. Whether it's too hot or it's too cold. And I covered the cold clothing because it's a wintertime episode. Part 2 happened to land, recently. So let's go over the winter stuff first. So many times, guys don't realize different bodies of water, some areas like the Delta have fog pockets, to where if you don't have like Gore-Tex or windbreaker over really warm clothes, that moisture will soak right into a sweater, and you'll be freezing cold if that's all you're wearing. So I tell guys, always be prepared with an underlayer, some good warm sweaters, long sleeve, long johns under there, then that coating sweater over the top of that, and then something that can block moisture, whether it's Gore-Tex or windbreaker over the top of your warm clothes. Make the investment in Gore-Tex if you can. If you can't, I understand, get a windbreaker and put it over the top. And the reason why I say this is everybody wants to be a tough guy for some darn reason. I think it's in all of our psychology or something that we're like, we'll tough it out. But the problem is when you try to tough it out and you're like, man, it's cold, it's in your head. And when you look at all professional athletes talk about competition, it's about getting in each other's head. Some of the best athletes of all times are trying to get into one another's head. And when it comes to fishing, you're an athlete against the fish and the elements. And when the elements are in your head, that athlete, your competitor, which is those elements in the fish, is now getting one over on you. instead of you focusing directly on your goal and directly what you need to be doing the whole time in each and every cast without repeating anything and without thinking about what you might be doing wrong, instead you're thinking that I'm cold or my fingertips are really numb. I'm not getting good bite detection on the line. I'm not feeling it. My casts are a little bit off. You're basically, if your fingers are too cold, you're going to be taking worse casts. It's just plain and simple. If you have good sensitivity in your fingers, you're going to be taking more accurate casts. If you're trolling out there, that doesn't really apply. But if you're casting, your fingers need to be warm. I wear those Under Armour glove liners, and the reason for those glove liners is they're thin, but they still keep my hands relatively warm. So basically 35 degrees and up, I wear the liners. 35 degrees and down, basically, you can bear it from that freezing and down point. I'll wear snow gloves, and I'll cut if you're right-handed, cut the index finger off and the thumb if you're bait fishing, because you're going to have to feel the line with your index finger, and you're going to have to thumb the spool with your thumb. And if you're flipping and pitching properly with your left hand, you should be pitching with your left thumb on the spool, so only cut off the left thumb and sew those shut. What's going to happen is your fingers and your hands are going to be so much warmer, and your dexterity is going to be 10 times what it would be if your hands were freezing, and you're going to end up making more accurate casts and outfishing the person behind you who's not doing that. So I'm hoping that kind of comes across to the listeners a little bit better. And another thing, keep your head warm. If you have a lot of hair and guys are still wearing hats and it's out freezing, wear a beanie. The majority of our body heat is lost through our head. Cover your head up really good. When I'm driving in the boat, you'll see me zip my Gore-Tex down against the top of my head because the ride is so much colder, you're going to lose the majority of your body heat. If you're coming to that stop, when you stop and your body feels like, whoa, you instantly feel that surge of warmth, oftentimes you don't have enough layers on. If you don't really feel that instant surge of warmth when you stop, you're properly covered up at that point. So that's one of those little key things to tell you that you probably should be wearing more layers when you come to that stop and then all of a sudden you feel that instant surge of warmth because your body was fighting the cold.
Yeah, it's really important. I think people forget when they're going to go on someone else's boat, they don't think about the wind chill factor and the fact that they're probably going to get splashed with water when they're out there on the Delta. It can get pretty cold.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
When we were recently, I was out doing a river to sea tournament, a major out there, and we were flying in the morning, and it really wasn't that cold. It was probably maybe in the mid-40s, but the waves were coming over, and I had water hitting me in the chest, and I was out there with Vince Borges for River to Sea and Phoenix Rods, and we had water hitting us in the chest at like nearly 70 miles an hour in 40 degrees. And if you get that on you, and you're making an hour-long run like we were doing, it could be absolutely brutal. And the same goes, and I'm going to cover it real quick for you, Scott, with the warmth in the summer, because that's just as bad. I know it's not summertime right now, but the same thing is, in the summertime, always have shorts under your pants. I know the first thing in the morning, it's always cold, no matter, when you're out fishing. If you get out early enough, it's cold. Always have shorts under, always have a tank top under, and always be prepared to get in the water.
Yeah.
And guys don't know this, and I don't show this often in my episodes, but, I live in Stockton, California, and our summers, on average, each day is nearly 100 degrees. And I've done lots of shoots where we're out in 105 and 110-degree weather, and I probably should be a little bit more of an advocate of showing you guys what I do to keep cool. About every hour, I will get in the water. If you look at my jersey or my gear, you'll notice it's wet.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't notice that, and I will get in the water for about a minute and cool down. And psychologically, your head's going to be in the right place, and you're not going to be worried about all that. So always be prepared to stay extremely warm or to do anything you can do to cool your body, because you're not thinking right when your body's outside its comfort zone.
Cool. And then, so I think next up you covered the subject of scaring the fish or spooking the fish. And also one of the mobber questions is, does my stereo on the boat scare the fish?
Yes, it does. It does scare the fish. Bass. And all audio travels 10 times what it does above water. So they do hear it, plain and simple. If you hear it with your ears, they hear it, trust me, under the water. It's very simple to make the mistake of being too darn noisy. Then at the same time, guys try to cover up that mistake by staying further off the fish. but they're bombing big aggressive casts into where those fish are, so that bam, the splash of the bait, unless they happen to be intrigued by it that day, more often than not is going to spook those fish. So it's better to try to get your boat within about 75% of your casting range so that 25% goes over the target you're casting, if that's a possibility, and to be a lot more stealthy in the boat. Listen to your stereo while you're traveling. Don't listen to your stereo when you're out casting for them. And you'll see a lot of the professionals when they're pre-fishing. If you look at any of the pre-fishing video footage from behind the scenes of Bassmaster, FLW, all that, you will see guys wearing headphones. And trust me, these guys could afford nice stereo systems in their boat, but they're wearing headphones for a reason. And they know that reason is to not spook fish. So noise is imperative. And what I cover in that video, I say, if you're taking a bunch of people out, fish in areas that receive a lot of boat traffic. Around marinas, these fish are all acclimated to noise, and that's really not going to affect your bite ratio much, fishing around noisier areas or high traffic spots along the river, because those fish are accustomed to hearing that. But the further you run up river arms, the further you get away from main traffic zones, those fish are used to hearing everything that's natural. When you come through, bang, bang, dropping pliers in the boat, that is very unnatural for them, and you have now made them aware of you instead of them focusing on their agenda to target a meal. So when you do present something that they may have wanted, they're so alert to you that they may become scared and, back off a little bit. So always stealthy. Flipping and pitching, when you see that in bass fishing, I have a video for it out there, how to flip and pitch. Just type in IF, flipping and pitching, into Google or YouTube, and it'll bring it right up for you. Flipping and pitching is a casting presentation to where when you release the lure from your cast, it comes out of your opposite hand that you're holding the rod with. And what it does is it goes out in a low pendulum level. So basically you're right over the surface of the water. Your lure's traveling very low to the water's surface, and it also enters the surface of that water extremely quiet. What that'll do is increase your bite ratio as well as your accuracy, to where if you want to be stealthy, flipping and pitching is something you have to do. And that becomes very imperative when we have less wind, when we have clearer conditions. When you have a nice, bright, blue, sunny day and there's no wind, no ripple on the water, it's dead calm, you need to be like a ninja and creep in there as stealthy as possible. If you're making roll casts, overhand casts, more than likely you're alerting those fish to your presentation. And whether they want it or don't want it that day, a lot of the time you can't get away with a big cast. You have to flip or you have to pitch. And when the water's clear, you can't get in there close enough to flip. You have to back off. So pitching is the presentation for calm conditions. Because when they don't see a ripple on the water, they're getting a really good, clean look. And they also don't hear anything. It's very quiet. So a big boom when you make your cast is going to spook them. It just needs to go whoop, right in the water, and you're going to catch a heck of a lot more fish that way.
Yeah, and then you're talking about water clarity, and also you talk about what fish can see. What mistakes you see people making about, we look at the water, but what are the fish seeing?
I tell people how deep you can see in the water. If you can see about 4 foot down, and a really good simple rule is measure the difference of your rod, stick your rod tip under the water. Can you still see your rod tip? Then pull it out and look at it. If you can see 3 foot down, those fish can times that by 4 or 5. So you're at, you do the math, and that's what the fish can see on average. They can see sometimes a little bit better, sometimes a little bit less, but you want to give yourself a generalized for how they can see it. And if those fish are in the prime of the season, meaning it's not too cold to where the fish is kind of lethargic and you need to get your bait a little bit closer to them. And so let me explain something real quick. Let's just use bass as an example for this, because it can be taken very generalized, and I want to make sure you guys understand what I'm talking about. Later in the spring, in midway through the spring, bass are in pre-spawn mode, and they're very hungry and wanting to eat a meal. So here, if a bass can see, if you can see 5 foot deep, the bass can see 20 to 25 feet away. And a lot of the time when they're in that prime of the season and they're wanting to eat, you could separate your cast by 20 to 25 feet, to where if you're moving down the bank searching for fish, you don't have to make a cast every 5 feet. If that cast hits and you start retrieving that bait, a lot of the time in the primes of the season where those fish are willing to commit and willing to eat, they will come get your bait. So in theory, you can cover a whole lot more water to find those fish. Instead of taking your time and picking each little piece apart to find them, that guy that's separating his cast by 15 to 20 feet and therefore moving on the trolling motor a lot faster than you down the bank is going to find those fish before you because those fish were willing to commit on his bigger casting gaps. And vice versa. If the water's dirty, if you can only see a few inches, the fish may be only able to see a couple of feet. So your casts are going to have to be a lot closer together for that fish to see it. And for me and any pro to feel comfortable with knowing that they can see it, we're going to keep those casts really tight in those dirty water conditions, those cleaner water conditions. If they are going to come after it, your bait needs to hit the water and it needs to stay there for a little bit so they can come over and get it. Or you need to have a bait like a jerk bait or a spinner bait, something that they'll travel to come get.
Another topic you're covering kind of is along the being a little lazy and with not retying your knots because knots do fatigue.
Oh, yeah. Now, a couple of guys were telling me, oh, no, you're going to be spending all day tying knots. Well, here's the thing. If you become good at tying knots, it takes a very small percentage of your day. I tell people always look at 25% of your fishing day making adjustments, either switching lures, tying new knots, because that's usually what it is. And I think even the best anglers in the world spend probably 15% of their fishing day doing that. And a really good angler is 25% and so on and so on and so on. That's from getting tangles out, tying new hooks on, tying new lures. Now, when I say tying new knots, if you go out and you're fishing all day and you come home, you lay your rods on the deck or you throw them in the back of your truck, and you come home and you go out the next day and you don't retie those lures, you have to look at the amount of stress. When you fasten a knot, that knot is being torqued around, it's being pulled on, it's being yanked. You also have fish hitting it. You're hitting objects throughout the day to where your line has suffered a tremendous amount of fatigue. And when you catch that fish the next day and you didn't retie, your line strength is not going to be nearly what it's supposed to be. You know, a lot of times I tell people, just by tying a knot and having it tied for one whole day, unless it's braid doesn't damage itself too much. Fluorocarbons, monos, and copolymers damage themselves a lot more than braid. It's not as crucial to retie with braid as it is the other three types. And what happens is you're psychologically telling yourself you're using, 15-pound tests. And realistically, if you had it on catching fish the day before and you went out and did it again, you're probably fishing somewhere around 10 to 12-pound tests. And then if you caught a big fish on that and he yanked it even harder and you put him in the box or you released them and you went to cast again, now you're fishing probably somewhere around 9 to 8-pound tests. And that's going to keep dropping. And yes, you can get away with it a lot of the time. But if you hook a trophy-sized fish and your line breaks and you think, well, I wonder what happened, more than likely that's what happened. Either his teeth scuffed it up, he put a lot of surge on that knot and fatigued that knot even more. So what I tell people, either tie the morning of, if you have that type of time, or tie the night before. I usually do the night before. I put a little line magic on my line and on my knots to make sure they don't fatigue as much. And what you're going to realize is you have a lot fewer break-offs like that.
What's a handful of knots that you would recommend people learn?
There's knots for the particular type of line. And when I say the consumer line is mono, which is majority nowadays is copolymer. That just means a mixture of nylon-based lines. And the most common knots known, most trout fishermen use clinch knots or improved clinch knots. That's a real common knot. It's probably the one that your grandfather taught you, when you're growing up as a kid. The most popular knot nowadays for monos and copolymers is the Palomar knot. Palomar knot's considered the strongest knot in the world by most. There's some that's going to argue that, but in my opinion, it is the strongest knot in the world. Now, what happens when I was telling you the line there, Scott, is when you start venturing into fluorocarbon. Fluorocarbon's very dense, almost like glass. It doesn't squeeze down on itself very well. To where when you tie a Palomar knot, there's two loops in the line, and if you look at a Palomar close, if you guys are listening to this, bring it up on your computer and look at the Palomar knot. And you're going to see that two lines go through the eye, and they fasten back over the top of themselves. And that's fine for a line that can stretch and push in on itself. But a more dense line like fluorocarbon, when you start squeezing on top of itself and it wraps back over the top and it squeezes on itself, you're actually lessening the line strength and you're increasing the odds of that knot breaking. So there's different types of knots for fluorocarbon. The improved clinch knot is great for fluorocarbon. The Palomar, if done perfectly, is okay, but I do not suggest people do the Palomar because you can easily make a mistake and lessen your knot strength by almost 50% when tying the Palomar with fluorocarbon. Now with braid, the double Palomar is really what you want to use, or an improved clinch knot. And the reason why, an improved clinch knot is when you wrap it around and you go through the line, the little hole in the bottom, loop in the line, and then you go back through the top. A regular clinch knot is when you wrap it around and you go through the bottom once. Lines that don't slip, a regular clinch knot is fine, but braid is made out of plastic strands, which are slick. So braid has a tendency to slip, and there's zero stretch. So when you jerk, a hook set, when you jerk that hook set, the line's not going to stretch. All the pressure immediately becomes on the knot. That braid potentially can slip if your tag end's relatively short. So what I suggest to people is do the Palomar, and what it does is it greatly decreases your odds of having that knot slip.
Another interesting topic you were covering was about bait size, and it was interesting the bigger bait, bigger fish, but there's less bigger fish.
Correct. A lot of people across the country, and I even had a guy made a great comment under it, and he said he lived over in, I think it was around Wisconsin somewhere, and he said, no, well, we use smaller baits a lot of the time, and we still catch the bigger fish. Now, I'm going to explain what I did in the video, but I also want to address what he said. A lot of the time when the fish are keyed into a particular type of bait fish that are swimming around, let's say if there's only bluegill in the area, and each bluegill on average is 4 inches long, more than likely the big fish in that area are feeding on 4-inch long bluegill. So that makes sense. And that's what basically the basis of his argument was, is that, well, no, if that's what they're feeding on, that's what they're going to eat, which is true. But you have to tell me this. I know you're a big guy like me, Scott. I'm 6'6", and I'm 240. I'm a big dude. And if you take one of my buddies who's only 5 foot and 100 pounds soaking wet versus me, and you put a chicken tender on the table and you put a Whopper on the table, what do you think more than likely I'm going to go for?
Yeah.
That chicken tender, if I eat it, I'm probably going to have to go find 5 more, right?
Right.
To sustain myself. So me going to find 4 more chicken tenders after I eat that one, I'm going to have to expend a lot of energy to go find those. But if I see that one Whopper in front of me and he's putting up a good effort to get away, that's only one Whopper I have to catch. And I'm going to be held over for the next couple days. So when I tell people this, that bigger baits appeal to bigger fish, and smaller baits appeal to more fish, not necessarily bigger or smaller. And the reason why, if a small bait travels in front of a big fish's nose, he doesn't have to travel to eat it. So yes, you can catch a bigger fish on a smaller bait. But that real big bait, a lot of the time, does not apply to a small fish because it's intimidating. But at the same time, if you miss that big fish by 5 feet with a small bait, he sees that as, that's a lot of energy for me to go get that smaller meal. But if he sees that real big bait, he says, well, that's not that much energy for a huge meal. So a lot of the time, that bigger bait is going to appeal to that bigger fish, and that bigger fish will come and commit to that bigger bait versus that smaller bait. With a smaller bait, you pretty much have to hit them right on the nose. So I'm going to clear up the argument that people will have with this. They'll say, well, I'll still go down and use the small bait, and I catch plenty of big fish. Well, that's only because you knew big fish were in that particular area, and you were very thorough with covering that area with a smaller bait. So more than likely, they got that smaller bait right in front of that bigger fish's nose, and then he committed at that point. But at the same time, you have to realize there's probably 20 to 1 2-pound fish versus 10-pound fish. So when you are fishing a bigger bait, you have to expect less bites, but much better quality bites.
Cool. You ready for some questions from the RodMob?
You bet.
All right. Well, they're random, and we'll throw them out at you. So
bring it on.
First off, somebody, I think this one was from Alex, is asking, can I fish for stripers all year long in the California Delta? And what do you recommend this time of year to get some action?
Okay, so what's going on there is we do have native fish that stay in the Delta. And then there is a majority of them that are migratory. So basically, a lot of your female stripers like to swim out to the ocean, and a majority of your males do too. So the prime season that the majority of the stripers are in the Delta, they start coming in around September, October. They start coming into the Delta from the ocean. They follow the bait fish, and they enter our system, and they're eating real heavy. They're eating shad, they're eating mudsuckers, they're eating crawfish, they're eating bluegill, real heavy until that water temperature starts to reach around, I would say, 52 to 49 degrees. And what's going to happen at that point is your shad are going to start becoming a little bit colder, and they're going to start dropping down to the bottom to where you're going to see less surface activity. And those stripers are also going to become a little bit more lethargic, and they're also going to pull into that deeper water in those lakes. Like French Track, they're going to find little pockets and sit down in the bottom. So those are those fish that moved in from the fall. They do come in, and they stay in the system, and in the spring, around March, April, May, they spawn. They spawn where rivers meet one another, and you have a lot of back eddies. Back eddy is just a swirl in the water. When you see that water swirling around, the stripers go in there and spray, the males spray, the females go lay eggs, and that's how they meet together. And then after that spawning process, the majority of them move back out to the ocean to feed. So your prime season is in the fall and in the spring for stripers. That's your prime season for casting lures. Now, in the dead of winter, and I'm talking pretty much, we'll count this month, we'll count December, January, February. That's where bait fishing is going to tend to excel over your lures. And your lures are really good in the fall and in the spring. So a lot of the time you'll see a lot of your trollers get out there in the spring. Trolling's fantastic in the spring, and a lot of the time you get your casters out there in the fall. You know, we mix it back and forth, but that's those times that they're real heavy in the system, but they are here year-round. There is stripers that live here, so don't be fooled. You have schooling stripers and you have roamers. Now, your roamer is the one that's off by themselves, and the roamers are often giants. So you'll see guys that want to go out and they want to cast a topwater lure for stripers, and they'll move down the bank for an hour, and they'll say, well, we didn't hit any. Okay? Well, what they're used to is fishing after schooling stripers, where you're going to get, hit after hit after hit if they're there, and they're really aggressive. But if you're looking for that one giant striper, you have to kind of fish for them like you are fishing for largemouth. You just got to keep moving down until you find them. The prime of the season for those is still fall and still spring, but you can't catch them in the middle of the summer. It's just going to be a heck of a lot harder. Your odds of catching them on lure is better off to go out to the surf, Baker's Beach, areas like that, Half Moon Bay, and surf cast for those bigger ones at that point. This time of year, if you don't see them boiling, which means they're attacking bait fish on top of the water, a lot of the time we'll use topwater lures like spooks or pencil poppers if we see them boiling. Now, what's going to happen is the shad are going to start moving midway through the water column now. So jerkbaits, large jerkbaits excel, like big pointers, Yellowbird's coming out with a series of bigger jerkbaits, which are absolutely fantastic. They're not on the market yet, but they will be at the International Sportsman Expo, so I'll be teaching everybody which ones to pick. Rattle traps are always good. The original Bill Lewis bluish chrome rattle trap is a fantastic striper bait for this time of year. And once it starts getting really cold, and which we're reaching to now, where a lot of spots in the Delta are already at 46 degrees, vertical jigging becomes imperative if you want to get them with a lure and not switch over to bait. But once you start getting below 50 degrees, bait becomes a lot more effective than lures. But if you want to catch them on lures, vertically jig something like laser minnows or big doctor spoons, like the 285 doctor spoons are good. 1 and 2 ounce laser minnows are really good in the Delta. If you're out in that deeper water like Rio Vista where you're reaching 35, 40, and even deeper than that, you can move up to a 3 ounce laser minnow. And basically, if you look up my video, how to vertically fish stripers, I teach those methods, and that's a really effective method in the colder water. I have casting for Delta stripers, and I have vertical fishing for striped bass. So if you watch those two, the vertical fishing is much better in colder water. So if you want to get out there after them right now, I would suggest the vertical fishing, or go look up my video on bait fishing Delta stripers, because that's going to be more effective if you want to put more fish in the boat.
Another question we got was someone just wrote magic thread. What is it?
Basically, magic thread is like it's a very stretchy nylon thread. Most tackle shops carry it. It's sticky thread, nylon thread. A lot of tackle shops carry the stretchy one, and then they carry like a red one that doesn't stretch. You really don't want the one that doesn't stretch because it's really hard to keep it on your bait. And the whole point of sticky thread and magic thread is to stretch it around your bait. It's like a very elasticy, thin rubber band. And it comes on a spool into where you keep wrapping it around your bait. You stick your bait on the hook, you wrap it around there, and what it does is it helps your bait stay on the hook a heck of a lot better. If you look up my video, Bait Fishing for Delta Stripers, if you type in Google or YouTube, type in IF space stripers or striped bass, and look at the bait fishing episode. I teach how to use magic thread for chicken livers and other ways to use magic thread on shad and mudsuckers.
Yeah, it's good stuff. You got definitely have it. You got definitely have that stuff.
Oh yeah, I have 5 spools in the boat at all time.
All right, so someone is asking, are polarized glasses worth the extra cost?
If I didn't go out with polarized glasses, I would turn around, make the 30-minute drive back home if I was close to home, and go get them. So yes, they are absolutely crucial. Now, the big misconception with polarized glasses is people think you're literally looking for fish swimming around. Sometimes, yes, you can see them, but the majority of the time, that's not what we're looking for with polarized glasses. All we're looking for is to see a little bit deeper in the water. Occasionally, we'll see bait fish swim by, or we'll see the top of a tree branch, and we'll go, oh, I didn't know a tree was there. And then you'll cast to that tree, and you'll catch a fish. But without polarized glasses, you had no clue. Now, the reason why I say I would turn around and go home and get them, because a lot of those other things, yeah, they're not necessarily overly imperative, but a lot of the time, if someone's netting for me in a boat, or if I'm netting for myself and they're not wearing polarized glasses, I get frustrated. And the reason why is it helps you see down a couple extra feet. And when you're netting, you always want to net a fish head first. And a lot of the time, if they're not wearing polarized glasses, they have no idea where the fish's head is. And you'll see them miss multiple times with the net before they get the fish without even realizing if they're wearing polarized glasses, they would have seen the direction the fish was heading perfectly the first time and greatly increase their odds of not missing them. Another thing, when you have the fish at the side of the boat, you could see the direction they're headed. You could see if one hook barely has them, if you should back off the pressure. So it gives you a lot of telltale signs at objects that become closer to the boat. It gives you a couple extra feet of visibility into the water. So yes, polarized glasses are absolutely imperative. Go get some if you don't have them right now. You're going to be kicking yourself for all that time you went out without them.
What do you think about different lens colors? Do you prefer one or the other?
I prefer the lightest color lens in low light, like yellows. They don't have a clear polarization. Polarization requires color on lenses. A lot of the time, if you're fishing blue water offshore, a blue lens is great. If you're fishing, dingy water like the Delta, anything with less than, 3 to 4 foot visibility on average, I just prefer the dark lens or a smoked lens. But low light days, you want to get away with the lightest color you can possibly use. Sometimes you can't see down in the water on real overcast days anyways, so then I will pick up a pair of safety glasses. And always wear glasses, guys. I fish 3 to 4 days a week. I've had hooks bounce off my face, stick me in the cheek. If you're not wearing some sort of eye protection at all times and you start fishing more often, you're greatly increasing your odds of seriously damaging your eyes, if not losing one. High, bright, sunny days, dark lenses. Low light days, amber lenses. If you're fishing very green water, a lot of the time a green lens actually helps. I've seen a minor difference, but I would tell people a dark lens or a light lens in that case, or get 2 affordable pairs with dark and light. Low light days, of course, the lighter lens. Brighter bluebird sky days, the darker lens is going to prevent you from getting a headache, and it's also going to relax your eyes and help you see deeper into that water.
Next question is around a trout setup. They're asking, what spinning rod and reel should I get for bank fishing for trout?
It really depends. If you're fishing in a stream with smaller trout, I'm going to recommend a completely different setup to you. For a long time, I like to compare, like, if you have a bass spinning rod that you already have, a lot of the time if you're fishing for trout, that setup will work. I use a 30 size reel. I actually use an Aura S with an Abu Garcia rod, but I've started looking more into the Phoenix rods, and I'm really liking what I see there. But really, you just want a 6'6" to 7.5 foot rod. A moderate fast rod in the medium or medium light category is what you want. I'm not going to tell you any rod is bad. Nowadays on the market, there's so many good rods out there. It's really what you want to put your price point at, where you want to buy. I like a 30 size reel, which is like a standard bass size spinning reel. Because if you're fishing from the bank and you hook a big fish, you want that extra line yardage on there. And a really good trick, if you're bank fishing for trout, a lot of the time the trout is not right next to the bank, and you have to whip your cast far out there. Here's a good little tip I'm going to give you guys to get you extra casting yardage. Spool a quarter of your spool from the bottom and do it with braid before you put your main line on. And what you're going to realize is your spool is going to accelerate a lot faster. Tie a double uni knot from that braid to fluorocarbon or mono, whatever you want to tie on, and you will literally realize 25 to 35 foot extra casting length, which is going to be a major difference on keeping your lure in the water more throughout the day and getting out there further to where other people weren't able to hit.
I like that.
Oh, yeah, it's deadly.
I like that. One more here is they're asking what strength difference should they have between their main line and the leader?
Now, here's a kind of a thought process that you want to have in mind. There is no set rules on this. If you have braid as your main line, more than likely, no matter how strong of a leader you use, it's going to break before your main line. Some people want a stronger leader than their main line for more abrasion resistance. Some people want a lighter one to where if they snag up, they can just break it off.
Right.
So what you have to realize is, let's talk about line diameter versus line strength here to make you better understand where a leader should be at. If you're fishing in clean, clear water, the thinner line diameter, which is going to equal the lighter pound in tests for line, is always going to be better. The cleaner, clear water, as light as you can go, is always going to get you more bites. But at the same time, you don't want to go too light to where you're going to be worried about getting broken off. If the water's dingy, you can go with a much bigger leader, a heavier line, a thicker line diameter. Now, if you have a lure hooked to that leader, you want your lure to have more action, you go with a lighter line and your lure will have more action. The heavier the leader to that lure, your lure will have less action. Now, I'll tell you something that the pros do. This is probably the first time I know a lot of you guys are going to hear this, but a lot of the time we don't want as much action when the water's cold. We don't want the bait to kick side to side as much, so we will put on a heavier leader to kind of deaden the action of that bait. And believe it or not, you can get more strikes that way because it's less intimidating for them.
Well, cool, man. Guys, as you can see, Nick's a wealth of information, and he's got tons of stuff out there on YouTube. And Nick, how do we follow your stuff and ask you some questions?
If you just go on to informativefisherman.com, that's my website. You can go on to YouTube, type in Informative Fisherman. Even if you go on YouTube, you can type in IF for Informative Fisherman, space bass, space trout, space sturgeon, space carp, or whatever you're looking for, and that'll bring up the videos I have on that particular species. Go to my channel. I have gear episodes broken down. I have multi-species episodes breaking down. I tell you how to pick from each type of line you can possibly want. I also have a helpline. It's been kind of chaotic lately to get a hold of me on the helpline, but if I am free, I will pick it up and answer your questions. But if you want a faster answer, text me. And if I can answer it over a text, I will. Otherwise, I'll call you back when I do have the opportunity. I'll also answer your emails. The helpline is area code, go ahead and take this down, 719-285-4247. That number again is area code 719-285-4247. And my email is informativefisherman@gmail.com. And I will make sure to answer your guys' questions. It's my passion to teach people. It's what I do for a living, and I want to educate the world, and I want to educate you guys. You guys all make my dream a passion, so don't hold back. Write me or text me, and I will answer your questions.
Well, Nick, we sure appreciate your time today, and thanks again for joining us on the RodMob.
Thank you, Scott. Blast as always.
All the latest in Northern California fishing. This is the RodMob. Upcoming events you won't want to miss. Here's the RodMob calendar.
This Tuesday, December 17th, Ultimate Bass University will be at Gone Fishing Marine in Dixon at 6:30 p.m. It's the holiday edition with the annual Flippin' Contest for ISE tickets. There'll be free food and drinks, so bring a friend and enjoy.
On Wednesday, December 18th, California Inland Fisheries Foundation has its annual Christmas Blast at 7 p.m. at the Elks Lodge in Sacramento. There will be a free buffet dinner and a big fundraising raffle. Seating is limited, so reservations are needed. Go to www.sifi.org or call 209-810-9603 for more info.
Thursday, December 19th, Guy J.D. Ritchie will be talking steelhead fishing at the Sacramento Fisherman's Warehouse at 6 p.m.
And of course, looking ahead to January, the International Sportsman's Expo is back at Cal Expo in Sacramento on January 9th through 12th. There will be over 600 vendors and a ton of great seminars. We'll be there talking RodMob and posting updates from the floor, and we'd love to meet you. We'll be hanging out with the folks at the California Sportsman's booth, so stop by and say howdy. And for more info on ISE, go to www.sportsexpos.com.
January 25th, the Diamond Classic Catch and Release Sturgeon Derby returns to Martinez for its 8th year. It's hosted by Flash Sport Fishing and Martinez Bait and Tackle. This is an awesome derby and it's a great event for kids. Check out www.diamondclassic.org for more info. You're not going to want to miss this one.
And Crosby Lodge at Pyramid Lake just announced the dates for their President's Day Derby. It'll be the weekends of February 8th and 9th and 15th and 16th. Prizes will be given to the 20th place and a great derby dinner will be served on the 15th. Head on over to www.crosbylodge.net for more info. And for details on these and other upcoming events, check out our events page at rodmob.com. If you've got an event you'd like us to mention, just drop us a line at fishon@rodmob.com.
Well, that's it for this week. Thanks for listening.
Big shout out to everyone who shared their reports with us. As always, you guys rock, and please keep them coming. You can share your reports with us on Facebook, shoot us an email at fishon@rodmob.com, or call and leave us a message on the RodMob hotline at 855-RODMOB1. And don't forget, we'll be looking for your oldie but goodie fishing pics of trips from years ago for this week's Throwback Thursday. We'll be posting all the throwbacks we get on our website this Thursday.
And if you do share a report, we'll send you a free weather-resistant RodMob sticker, which we guarantee is going to look pretty awesome on your car, truck, boat, cooler, pet snake, pet rock, tackle box, fridge, man cave door, or your peachy folder.
Actually, I don't know if we can guarantee the pet snake that it will look pretty awesome on a pet snake.
Okay, scratch that one. Pet snake not guaranteed.
If you're listening to us on your iPhone or iPod, please be sure to subscribe to our podcast. You can do that right from iTunes. It's totally free. And if you're digging the show, please take a moment to give us 5 stars in the iTunes store and leave a review. If you've got suggestions for us on how to improve the show or requests on things you'd like to hear, we definitely want to hear from you. Drop us a line at fishon@rodmob.com.
Thanks again for continuing to support your weekly Northern California fishing podcast. And until next time,
Mamma mia, that's a spicy meatball.
keep us posted.
RodMob.